Last night, Jimmy Kimmel Live became the epicenter of a media storm when Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, abruptly walked off the set, following a tense confrontation with Jimmy Kimmel. With a calm yet fiercely resolute demeanor, Meghan did not shy away from provocative questions, courageously countering them, exposing media bias and long-standing prejudices. That explosive moment not only sent shockwaves through public discourse, but also solidified Meghan's position as an icon who dares to stand up for justice and truth, a powerful voice amidst a storm of controversy. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the latest stories. Under the bright studio lights, the atmosphere in the Jimmy Kimmel Live set was thick with an indescribable tension. Jimmy Kimmel appeared with his familiar smile, but this time it seemed forced, his eyes glinting with a probing intensity. Tonight we welcome a very special guest, someone who has been at the center of relentless debates in the media and on social platforms. Please give a warm welcome to the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. The applause rang out, sparse, cautious, a mix of curiosity and wariness. Meghan walked out, gracefully taking her seat across from Kimmel. Without preamble, Jimmy dove straight in. Meghan, it's an honor to have you here. Over the past few years, you've gone through tremendous upheaval under unprecedented public scrutiny. How do you find your voice amidst all that noise? And how do you stay true to yourself when the whole world is watching your every move? Meghan smiled faintly, her voice calm but clear, radiating confidence blended with the poised dignity characteristic of royalty, yet infused with the sincerity of a modern woman. Thank you, Jimmy. Finding your voice. It's an ongoing journey, especially when your life story is constantly narrated by others. Sometimes to live authentically, you have to be brave enough to confront the falsehoods that have been spread, and dare to rewrite your own story. Meghan's sharp, pointed response wiped the smile off Jimmy Kimmel's face. His expression betrayed clear discomfort, though he quickly regained a facade of confidence. Kimmel realized this wasn't an interview he could easily steer. He decided to cut to the core, where he believed he could gain the upper hand. I hear you, Meghan, Kimmel said, his tone dripping with exaggerated sympathy. Having your story told for you must be a tough experience. But you have to admit, when someone chooses to join a family, of the stature of the British royal family, and then decides to step away, all eyes are on them. People have a right to be curious, even to form their own opinions about the royal dramas or the life choices you've made. Don't they? Meghan locked eyes with Kimmel, unflinching. A faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed her lips. Jimmy, curiosity is human nature, she began, her voice steady. But there's a vast difference between genuine curiosity and crafting a narrative, painting it with bias and misinformation, just to serve a specific agenda. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, his lips tightening. A specific agenda, Your Grace. He emphasized Your Grace, as a reminder, or perhaps a subtle jab at the title she had stepped away from, but still held. Meghan was unfazed. An agenda to sell papers? To boost views? To perpetuate a pre-existing narrative, no matter how much it distorts the truth? She replied, without hesitation. When stories are told not to understand but to judge, when private details are weaponized for attack, when someone's vulnerability is exploited for laughs, that's no longer curiosity. It's a form of media violence. A faint murmur rippled through the audience, then faded into silence. The crowd began to sense the gravity of the exchange. This was no longer the light-hearted banter typical of late-night TV. Kimmel cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. But Meghan, you and Prince Harry have chosen to share a lot about your lives publicly. From the Oprah interview to the recent documentary series. Isn't that telling your story? And once you go public, don't you have to accept the public's reactions? Yes, Meghan acknowledged, nodding slightly. We chose to tell our story, because when your story is constantly distorted, turned into toxic lies, you have no choice but to speak for yourself. It's not about complaining, it's about clarifying. So those who genuinely want the truth can hear it directly, not through the filter of tabloids or hosts with their own agendas. Meghan's words were a direct arrow aimed at Kimmel. He blinked, his smile stiffening. Your own agendas, huh? Kimmel said, his tone starting to betray irritation. I'm just trying to offer a balanced perspective, Meghan. The public has a right to know, and the media has a responsibility to inform. Not every criticism is biases or media violence. Jimmy, Meghan replied, her voice remarkably calm, though now tinged with a slight edge. There's a huge difference between information and manipulation. When a newspaper deliberately publishes negative stories about me, but writes positively about another royal for the same actions, that's not balance. When I'm criticized for holding my husband's hand while another is praised for it, that's not information, it's bias. And when a woman is labeled difficult or arrogant just for having her own voice and setting boundaries, that's not critique, it's prejudice. Meghan's gaze swept the room again, slowly, as if conveying her message not just to Kimmel, but to every individual listening. We live in an era where controlling the narrative matters more than the truth. Biases are nurtured, stories are fabricated, and individuals are framed into roles they never chose. I'm here to say, I refuse that role. Meghan's composure, paired with her incisive arguments about media bias, left Kimmel visibly unsettled. He realized he was on the defensive. Instead of continuing to debate the nature of information, Kimmel shifted tactics, launching a more direct attack on Meghan herself, hoping to rattle her resolve with personal cutting remarks that dredged up old wounds. Meghan, Kimmel said, his tone laced with feigned sympathy and a hint of sarcasm. I get that you've been through a lot, but some say you and Prince Harry have chosen drama, that you always want to control everything, and when you can't, you play the victim. Even in the Oprah interview, the stories about not being helped or the indifferences from the royal family, don't you think that's also a way of telling your story, but in a way that shifts blame onto others? Meghan's gaze remained steady, unwavering. The faint smile on her lips now carried a clear note of irony. Jimmy, you might be confusing telling your story with whining, she responded. Her voice still calm, but each word sharp as a blade. When a woman of color marries into an institution centuries old, and then faces overt racist attacks from the press, attacks many turned a blind eye to, her speaking out isn't playing the victim, it's fighting for her dignity. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by her bluntness. He glanced around the room, where the silence had grown heavy. Racism, Kimmel repeated as if trying to downplay the weight of the word. That's a serious accusation, Meghan. Don't you think sometimes it's just the normal scrutiny every royal faces? Normal scrutiny. Meghan let out a soft, incredulous laugh. Jimmy, have you ever seen a white royal compared to a monkey? Or criticized for eating avocado because it contributes to deforestation? Or labeled disruptive just for smiling at a public event? That's not scrutiny. It's dehumanization, systematically fueled by the media. And pretending it's normal is part of the problem. The studio seemed to hold its breath. Meghan's words were powerful, direct, leaving some audience members exchanging shocked glances at her boldness. The camera operators held steady, but some production staff in the control room began exchanging uneasy looks. Kimmel cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. I think most people agree. Racism is wrong, Meghan, he said, his voice now tinged with strain. But you can't use that to justify every choice you've made. Some argue you've exploited the situation to achieve a dream life without the responsibilities. Responsibilities, Meghan countered, her eyes now icy. Jimmy, you talk about my responsibility to the public, but what about the media's responsibility? What about those who manipulate the truth and spread hatred? When a newspaper prints false headlines about me, forcing me to sue to protect my reputation, and then continues as if nothing happened, who's held accountable then? She paused, letting her question hang in the air. When an entire media system is built to sustain a narrative that serves them, regardless of the truth, and then demands responsibilities from those they attack, isn't that hypocrisy? You want me to be accountable for stories I didn't write, for lies I didn't tell. Kimmel shook his head, trying to deflect. But Meghan, you have a huge platform. You can speak out. Not every criticism is malicious. Sometimes, people just want more transparency from you and Prince Harry. Transparency. Meghan replied, her voice dripping with irony. We've been more than transparent, Jimmy. We've spoken about mental health, about the pressures we faced, about not getting help when we needed it, and the response. Mockery, being called whiners. being told we're tarnishing the royal family. So, is transparency in your eyes about saying what the media wants to hear, or is it about acknowledging our pain? Meghan leaned forward slightly, her gaze locked on Kimmel. Many call me divisive, but I wonder, who's really sowing division? A woman who dares to speak her truth, or a media system that perpetuates prejudice and hatred, based on race and gender, just because they don't want change? She continued, her voice now carrying the weight of frustration and integrity. Society feels entitled to judge, to blame victims, and to glorify those who distort the truth. When I'm labeled an outsider, or troublemakers, just for having my own opinions, for leaving a system that didn't serve me, that's not constructive criticism. It's control. It's a way to maintain the old order, where women of color are expected to know their place and stay silent. Kimmel was speechless. He stared at Meghan, his expression utterly rattled. Her composure, and razor-sharp reasoning, had dismantled his every attempt. He was exposed. The studio fell silent. But it was now a silence of admiration, not tension. Jimmy Kimmel cleared his throat, struggling to regain his footing, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Meghan, Kimmel began, his tone now stiff. I understand you feel unfairly treated, but you have to admit, you've chosen a very different path. Leaving a centuries-old institution, abandoning a role many dream of, many see that as breaking tradition, even destructive, that you don't grasp the duty and expectations tied to your position. Meghan Markle looked at Kimmel, her gaze no longer tinged with irony, but with absolute calm, mixed with a hint of pity. Jimmy, you talk about duty and tradition, she replied, her voice clear and powerful, without needing to rise. But for whom? And at what cost? Duty should serve truth, not deceit. Tradition should serve growth, not stagnation. When a tradition demands silence from a woman, demands she accept lies and abuse in the name of keeping up appearances, that's no longer a tradition worth honoring. It's a chain. Meghan leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. People say I broke under tradition. I call it evolving. I call it refusing to be defined by what others want me to be. True strength isn't in following what's prescribed, but in daring to walk your own path, no matter how hard. Strength is saying no to what doesn't serve your growth, your family, or the values you believe in. Kimmel tried to interrupt, but Meghan pressed on, her voice now eloquent and compelling. I used to think strength was about pleasing everyone, being perfect in every mold set for me. But I've learned that true strength lies in authenticity, in accepting your flaws, your vulnerabilities, and still standing tall. Strength is allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to hurt, and still finding the resilience to rise, not for others, but for yourself. Her gaze shifted outward, as if addressing a broader audience beyond Kimmel. Women, especially women, are often taught to shrink, to stay silent, to please in order to be accepted, that their voice only matters when it fits society's mold. But I believe women don't need to find their voice. They already have one. What they need is to feel empowered to use it. And what society needs is to learn to listen. Meghan's words echoed through the studio. The audience, initially silent, began showing clear signs of agreement. Nods, soft murmurs of "me if." Jimmy Kimmel searched for a weakness in her words, a gap to counter, but found none. Meghan was speaking beyond personal disputes. She was articulating a philosophy of life. You talk about destructions or breaking. Meghan continued, turning back to Kimmel. I call it rebuilding. Rebuilding a life true to myself. Rebuilding boundaries to protect my mental health. Rebuilding a future where my children can grow up without facing the same prejudice and hatred their mother endured. That's not a selfish game, Jimmy. It's an act of self-preservation, and more than that, an act for the future. And that means throwing away everything you had? Kimmel asked, his voice clinging to a final note of defiance. A position, a title so many dream of. Sometimes, to build something new, you have to let go of what's old, no matter how shiny it appears. Meghan replied, her voice resolute. A person's worth isn't in the titles or status they hold, but in their integrity, kindness, and ability to live true to themselves. I didn't throw anything away. I chose a different path, one where I can be myself, contribute in ways I believe are most meaningful, not according to someone else's script. She looked directly at Kimmel, her eyes now gleaming with confidence and defiance. You say I broke the rules. But have you ever asked, who made those rules? And do those rules still fit today's world? For me, strength is knowing when to listen, and when to speak your truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes others. That's the strength I've learned. And I'll never apologize for using it. Kimmel was overwhelmed. Meghan's words were not just a rebuttal, but a manifesto. He realized he couldn't win this debate with outdated arguments or personal attacks. The silence that enveloped the studio was one of awe, no longer the tension of before. Every argument Kimmel threw was convincingly dismantled by Meghan Markle, and her composure turned his attacks into evidence of her point. He knew he couldn't outwit her with reason. In desperation, Kimmel resorted to a final blow, a direct, vicious personal attack, hoping to unsettle Meghan and expose a moment of weakness. Look, Meghan, Kimmel said, his tone now devoid of any courtesy, only frustration and resentment. He leaned forward, his eyes betraying clear disdain. You talk about strength, about independence, about rewriting your story, but honestly, to a lot of people, what you're doing is just a carefully staged act, to dodge responsibility and live a dream lives without the pressures. You complain about everything, mental health, unfair treatment, while living in privilege, known to the world. You talk about truth, but you're tearing down something that's existed for centuries, just because it doesn't fit your personal vision. Kimmel paused, his face flushed. He believed he had landed a devastating blow. The entire studio held its breath. The audience stared at Meghan, waiting for a reaction. They expected anger, confusion, or at least a hint of hesitation. But Meghan Markle remained seated, eerily composed. The faint smile on her lips vanished entirely, replaced by a piercing cold gaze that saw through every one of Jimmy Kimmel's antics. She took a slow, deep breath, the air in her lungs, seemingly charged with renewed resolve. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Meghan Markle rose from her chair. The act, simple yet immensely powerful, instantly silenced the studio. The stillness was so profound that one could hear their own heartbeat. Her figure, no longer confined by the chair, exuded an overwhelming presence. She didn't step forward, but stood rooted in place, like an unyielding monument, amidst a whirlwind of judgment. Her eyes locked onto Kimmel, devoid of the earlier courtesy. It was the look of someone who had endured enough, and would now respond without mercy. You say I'm complaining, Meghan began, her voice not loud, but resonant and powerful, like a clarion call. Jimmy, I spent years staying silent, trying to fit in, trying to serve. I've watched lies about me spread, my mental health erode, relationships destroyed by the very media you're defending. And when I speak my truth, I'm not complaining, I'm fighting. Fighting for the truth, fighting for those without a voice, fighting for my children, so they don't have to grow up in a world where difference is punished and truth is distorted. Kimmel tried to interrupt. But, no buts, Jimmy. Meghan cut him off, her voice turning steely, each word striking like a hammer. You sit behind that desk every night, pretending to speak for the public, but you're just an echo of outdated biases. You turn complex issues into cheap jokes, creating division where there should be understanding. You say I'm destroying something centuries old. Have you ever asked whether those centuries-old things are truly fair? Do they truly bring happiness? Or do they only serve a select few, maintaining power by silencing different voices? Meghan took a small step forward, her gaze pinning Kimmel, who instinctively leaned back. You don't know what real suffering is, Jimmy. You don't know the pressure of having every action, every word scrutinized, distorted, turned into a sensational story for entertainment. You don't know the loneliness of having the world turn its back on you because of lies. You only read about it in tabloids, on Twitter, and then you sit here, repeating those lies as if they're truth. Kimmel's face paled. His confidence was gone, replaced by visible confusion and panic. The control room staff began to panic, some signaling Kimmel to end the show, or cut to commercial. But he seemed frozen. Meghan continued, her voice now radiating authority and defiance. You say I'm destroying. No, I'm building my life again, building a future for my family, building a space where we can live authentically, where we can contribute without facing baseless hatred. And you, and people like you, who fear change, who fear new voices, are trying to destroy what we're building. Her words echoed like a manifesto in the studio's absolute silence. Jimmy Kimmel, facing Meghan's piercing, defiant gaze, was utterly unraveled, his face flushed with anger and shame, his forced smile gone. He stared at her, seemingly provoked to the breaking point by her resilience and unassailable words. "That's enough," Kimmel snapped, his face contorted. He slammed his hand on the desk, the sharp sound reverberating. "Who do you think you are, lecturing me and everyone else about truth and morality? You're someone who abandoned your duty, chose to air your private life to the world, and now demands respect. Maybe it's time you learned that words have consequences. Meghan Markle, you can't just say anything without facing a reaction. Your days of living above accountability are over." Kimmel's words were a blatant threat, delivered live on national television. The studio gasped. The audience, the production crew, everyone was stunned by the host's complete loss of control. Meghan Markle stood tall, her gaze unwavering in the face of Kimmel's outburst. She looked at him, her expression a mix of disappointment and faint pity. "Are you threatening me, Jimmy?" she asked, her voice astonishingly calm, but carrying an undeniable weight. "Threatening me on national television, because I dared to speak my truth. You don't know what consequences really are. Consequences are when your image is distorted, your voice silenced, your life isolated just for standing up for fairness. Consequences are when your mental health is destroyed by systematic smear campaigns. Those are consequences." She took another small step toward Kimmel's desk, not to attack but to assert her presence. "And you," Meghan continued, her voice brimming with strength, "you're just an echo of an outdated system, of biases and fear of change. You label anyone who disagrees with you an enemy, turning different voices into dramas for entertainment. You can't accept that a woman can think for herself, choose for herself, fight for herself, without needing your approval or anyone else's." Kimmel's face twisted further with rage. He pointed directly at Meghan. "This show guests like you don't get to. I decide who says what here. If you can't respect the rules, you don't belong here." Suddenly, Kimmel gestured toward the cameras, his eyes blazing. "Cut the feed. Cut it now," he shouted, his voice cracking with fury. "Get her out of here. Now." Security guards appeared from the wings, advancing toward Meghan. Chaos erupted. The audience began booing, protesting Kimmel's actions. Shouts of "no" rang out from multiple directions. Meghan Markle gave Kimmel one final look, her eyes filled with disappointment and a trace of disdain. She showed no fear or hesitation as the guards approached. Instead, she turned to face the main camera, offering a faint, knowing smile full of authority. "Before I leave, Jimmy," Meghan said, her voice clear and strong, not needing to rise despite the growing noise, "I want to say this: I've lived my life with authenticity. I've stood up for the values I believe in, and I will keep doing so. You can kick me off this show, but you can't silence the truth. You can't erase the voices of those who dare to live authentically." She turned away from Kimmel without hesitation, walking confidently toward the wings, undeterred by the circling guards. Her steps were unhurried, exuding poise and pride. The backstage door closed behind her, marking the abrupt, dramatic end to an unforgettable interview. Jimmy Kimmel stood frozen, staring into the void, utterly defeated. The deafening silence lasted only a moment after the door shut, swallowing Meghan Markle's figure entirely. Jimmy Kimmel remained stunned behind his desk, his face pale, completely disoriented, his mouth opened trying to speak, but no sound came out. His defeat was etched in every feature. Then, the restraint broke. A tentative clap began, quickly spreading into a thunderous ovation, erupting into cheers that filled the studio. The audience leapt to their feet, phones raised, capturing this historic moment. Despite the futile efforts of security, chants of Meghan started in one corner, rapidly spreading, drowning out the applause. They weren't just clapping for a performance, but for a powerful declaration, for the courage of a woman who dared to stand up. On the control room's large screen, the director and producer's faces were ashen. They exchanged panicked looks, unable to believe what had just unfolded. Live ratings were skyrocketing, but the show's and Kimmel's reputation were plummeting. One of them tried to order a cut to commercial, but it was too late. Within minutes of the chaotic end, The video of the confrontation between Meghan Markle and Jimmy Kimmel spread like wildfire across social media. Clips of Meghan's sharp responses, especially her standing moment and final statement, became instant focal points. Hashtags, #Meghan and Kimmel, #Meghan Markle speaks truth, #Kimmel exposed, and #Duchess of Sussex quickly dominated global trends. The initial online reaction was an explosion of emotion. Millions expressed shock, quickly turning to outrage and condemnation of Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel dug his own grave tonight. One Twitter user wrote, "Meghan Markle didn't just win, she crushed him with truth and dignity." Another commented, "This isn't just entertainment, this is a woman facing down an entire hostile media machine. I've never admired Meghan more." Meghan's quotes, especially those about racism, media hypocrisy, and rewriting your own story, were shared millions of times. She became a new symbol of resilience, and a voice for women against oppression. Women of color, in particular, expressed deep empathy, feeling Meghan had voiced their struggles. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel faced unprecedented backlash. His social media was flooded with thousands of angry comments. The phrase "Kimmel is a hypocrite" trended. Old statements of his were unearthed, compared to his behavior that night, to highlight his contradictions. Major news outlets, from tabloids to reputable networks, couldn't ignore the storm. Initially, some anti-Meghan outlets tried to downplay the incident, calling it a tense interview or misunderstanding. But under immense public pressure, and the unstoppable spread of the videos, they were forced to report in detail, even publishing analyses of Kimmel's downfall and Meghan's reaffirmation. Morning and afternoon talk shows the next day were filled with heated debates. Media experts, activists, and some celebrities joined the discussion. A few tried to defend Kimmel, arguing he was just doing his job or representing the public voice, but their arguments were quickly buried under overwhelming criticism. The event became a major test for public views on cancel culture and the media's role. It wasn't just a clash between two individuals, but a collision of ideologies, generations, and perspectives on truth and justice. That night, Meghan Markle clearly emerged victorious, not just on stage, but in the hearts of millions watching. For Jimmy Kimmel, the night was an irredeemable disaster. The immediate, fierce public backlash engulfed him. His social media was bombarded with millions of angry comments, demanding accountability, and his firing. The criticism came not only from Meghan's fans, but also from neutrals outraged by his unprofessionalism, personal attacks, and blatantly kicking out a guest on live TV. Jimmy Kimmel Live's ratings plummeted the following night and days after, hitting record lows. Major sponsors began pulling out or pausing contracts, unwilling to be associated with a show mired in an ethical scandal. News outlets and media experts, once divided on Meghan, now united in condemning Kimmel. He became a symbol of power abuse, hypocrisy, and the outdated mindset of some media figures who use fame to impose views and silence difference. The pressure from ABC's leadership was unbearable. Within 48 hours, Kimmel issued a public apology on social media, but it was criticized as insincere and forced. Days later, leaks suggested he would temporarily leave the show to spend time with family, a euphemism for an unofficial firing. His once solid career now teetered on collapse. In contrast, for Meghan Markle, the confrontation was not a defeat, but a resounding victory, a stunning rebirth. Her reputation, battered by countless media attacks, was spectacularly restored. She was not just vindicated, but became a hero, a symbol of resilience, courage and integrity, for standing up for truth and defending herself against lies. Millions, especially women and minority communities, saw in Meghan the courage they aspired to have. She became a voice for those who felt silenced, misjudged, or unfairly treated by societal biases. Her projects, including her podcast, documentaries, and Archwell's charitable work, suddenly gained massive public interest and support. Producers and directors, once hesitant due to royal drama, now openly expressed admiration and eagerness to collaborate. These offers came not from pressure, but from genuine respect for her strength and intellect. Meghan Markle proved she didn't need a royal title to have a voice and influence. She forged a new path, a space where she could contribute and inspire authentically, uncontrolled. The incident reshaped how the public viewed late-night talk shows, forcing a reckoning on the role of hosts and the media's responsibility toward guests. It reinforced the belief that, despite efforts to erase or distort truth, resilience, integrity, and the courage to stand for one's beliefs would ultimately prevail. Meghan Markle's story was the clearest proof, a woman who overcame every storm, not just to survive, but to shine in her own way. The story of Meghan Markle and Jimmy Kimmel illuminated stark realities in contemporary American society. It highlighted the relentless battle between truth and manipulative media, especially in the era of cancel culture. Meghan, with her resilience and sharp arguments on live TV, represented individuals fighting to protect their voice and dignity against a tide of judgment. The first core lesson is the power of standing up for truth. When Kimmel tried to demean Meghan by calling her a whiner, she countered that it was fighting for dignity, not complaining. This resonates deeply in America, where from workplaces to online forums, many face misinformation or bias. The story reminds us not to stay silent against injustice, but to calmly and logically clarify the truth, rather than letting others define us. Second, the story warns of the dangers of manipulative media and the misuse of cancel culture. Kimmel, as the host, symbolized forces willing to distort narratives for their agenda. Accusations like breaking tradition mirror criticisms many Americans face when challenging the status quo. The lesson is clear: critical thinking is essential, and we must avoid rushing to cancel someone based on unverified claims, especially on social media. Finally, Meghan's rebirth, after being kicked off, carries a powerful message about overcoming adversity. When she declared, "You can kick me off this show, but you can't silence the truth," she displayed extraordinary resilience. In a society obsessed with conformity, the story encourages us to let go of what no longer serves our growth, no matter how glamorous it seems. It's a journey of redefining success, living true to core values, and finding one's voice, a valuable lesson for every American seeking meaning in life. If Meghan Markle's courage in facing bias has resonated with you, subscribe to the channel to stay updated on deep analyses of truth and resilience in life. Thank you for listening to this voice, and see you in the next video.